Let's talk case knives. Um, and in particular, I want to talk about Case's recent foray into modern frame lock flippers in the form of the Marilla and Kinzua. Um, but first, just as a baseline, we got to establish sort of what the brand identity of Case is and has been. Um, when most people think of a case knife, they're going to think of a pocket knife, maybe like this, that is a slip joint, probably has multiple blades, some familiar blade profiles, things like spay blade or clip point blade, toothpick style blade, um, sheepfoot blade, right? See things like this. This has three blades. I think this is a Stockman model. Um, it's got the familiar blade profiles of a traditional multi-blade slip joint folder. No lock, right? Got some brass in there, and I mean, they've made them with all kinds of different handle materials. Or you could get a single blade knife like this Sodbuster, right? This jigged bone uh, handle scales, and you know, a little bit broader blade, but still relatively small blade compared to a lot of um, contemporary pocket knives, single blade pocket knives. Now, Case has ventured into more modern materials occasionally. I mean, they'll use glass filled nylon in some of their handle designs for lightweight and you know keep costs down, make things a little simpler for production. They've even done things like assisted opening mechanisms. So this is a pretty traditional looking Case pocket knife, but it has a spring assisted opening. Um, but in 2022, we saw a real, I believe it was 2022 that these came out, a real departure for Case, making frame lock flippers that really are very modern, um, with aluminum handles, G10 inlay in the case of the Marilla, pocket clip, which a lot of case knives lack. I mean, some do have pocket clips. Some case knives do have locks, but usually a back lock, or they do have some liner locks. Um, but I think this is the first frame lock I've seen. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's the first ever frame lock case. They've probably, I mean, Case makes a lot of knives, so they may have had this kind of a lock at some point on some knife, but certainly not what we think of as a typical case knife. And just a much bigger blade than we're used to seeing on most of the case folders. These, like all cases, are made in the U.S. They're based in Pennsylvania. Okay. Um, these are running on ball bearings, and they open very, very, very quickly. Um, the Marilla and the Kinzua have S35 VN blade steel on the standard models, which is a big step up from the sort of basic stainless steel that they use in most of their pocket knives, or the carbon steel that's still available on some of the traditional folders. Um, so this is a stainless steel. It's particle metallurgy. It has good toughness, good edge retention, um, and it's not impossible to sharpen. Um, the the Marilla and the Kinzua, although they're sort of similar, do have a couple of significant differences. I mean, they're both aluminum handle frame lock flippers. Um, a couple of things you'll notice just right away. The Marilla has this inlay piece of G10 for a little extra texture, which does help with getting a secure grip on the knife. The Kinzua has these contours, right, which are really nice and do provide a nice ergonomic feel in hand. Um, the big difference in operation, well, there's differences in blade shape too. So these two are both drop points. The Kinzua is also available in a tanto point, uh, but uh, what I've got here is the drop point, and you can see it's a different drop point profile than the Marilla's, right? It's a little narrower, but it's not as acute actually. It's narrower through this part of the blade, but the Kinzua comes down to a more acute tip. Um, the Kinzua has a big swedge. I mean, sorry, the Marilla has a big swedge, whereas the Kinzua does not, right? It has just the grind, and then this is the flat up here. It's not a swedge. Um, and the the Kinzua is very stout um, out toward the tip. This is not a tip that would be easy to break, right? So if you were going to use this for some heavy duty piercing or scraping, I think it would be well suited to that task. Well suited to, like scraping the mud out of your boot treads or something like that. Traditional sort of sodbuster type use. Um, the the blade uh, does stay really almost the full thickness along the spine until it gets out pretty close to the tip. And that is going to be helpful for piercing and for tip strength, but it's also means that if you're doing push cuts through material, like if you're cutting through cardboard or something like that, this is not going to be a real efficient cutter because it's going to get a lot of drag up toward the spine. Um, just something to keep in mind. The Marilla should perform a little better in that regard. It is a pretty thick spine initially, but then there's this swedge that narrows things out, removes some of that drag, and it's a taller blade, and it's a high saber grind. Uh, it's a flat grind. It's not really it's not a full flat grinder. I wouldn't even call it a high flat grind necessarily, but it's higher than most saber grinds. Um, on this particular sample, the action is great. Um, it's I barely am pressing on that, and it's opening just fine. I'm almost trying to fail it, and it's still making it open. Um, and there's no lock stick on this particular sample. Now, I picked up an SMKW Smoky Mountain Knife Works exclusive version of this knife, which had MagnaCut steel and a fat carbon inlay instead of G10 inlay. So two nice upgrades. Uh, but it had terrible lock stick. It opened nicely, but then when I tried to close it, it was really hard to disengage the lock. It, um, and I returned it, even though I was excited about the materials and I like this knife design. That lock stick was just unacceptable, and hopefully that was just that one individual sample. I don't know. I'm not going to order another one to to take a chance and see. But I'm happy with this S35 VN one that I got. Just really very easy to disengage the lock. Which brings me to my main complaint about the Kinzua. Now, if you look at these, they look kind of like the handle design is similar. It's not identical, but it's similar. But I want to point out, look at the case logo and look how much space there is around it. where this cutaway is for the thumb to disengage the lock, versus on the Kinzua. I mean, the logo is in the same place on the blade, pretty much. But look how much less space around it there is here on the Kinzua. Okay, so it's a much smaller cutaway area for you to put your thumb in to disengage the lock. And this is a flipper, right? And the flipper tab is a little different, right? The shape of the flipper tab. This is a little bit of a bigger tab than this one. So when you're using the Marilla, you can disengage the lock and get your thumb out of the way. No problem. With the Kinzua, when you try and disengage the lock and you start closing the blade, the flipper tab is going to hit your thumb, and you're going to then... Now, I still am encountering some resistance at this point. I'm trying to close that blade. I can't. I need to hold that open longer and move this blade further before it's fully clear of the detent that's in there and the little lock insert, right? So you have to pinch your thumb with the flipper and bring the blade almost to where you're going to close it on your thumb before you can take your thumb away. Otherwise, it's still not fully unlocked. That, I think, is a big problem. I mean, and I don't have like freakishly huge thumbs. I wear an XL glove, but that's pretty standard for most adult men in the United States. Uh, the flipper tab has to get all the way to there. That's where the detent. That's where it's clearing the detent. That doesn't leave a lot of space left for your thumb. So you got to pull your thumb out at that point. And this thing, if you're already in motion closing it, the likelihood of closing this thing on your thumb is not insignificant. And they could fix this just by opening this up a little more, giving you a little more room, and reprofiling the flipper tab a little bit so it's more like the flipper tab on the Marilla. The Marilla is just better. It's just a better design in terms of operating it. Kinzua looks cool, and I like the handle contours. And I think if they took the best features of this knife and the best features of this knife, and they put them together into one knife, you'd have a pretty awesome knife. But as it is, I don't think I can really recommend the Kinzua because it's a pain in the butt to close it, to disengage the lock and close it. So if you're interested in these knives, I would say pick up a Marilla. And I suspect that something will change, and either there'll be a new version of the Kinzua down the road, or they'll get rid of it and come up with a different model that doesn't have some of these issues. But yeah, flipper tab needs to change. This cutaway needs to change, and you could put a little bit of a swedge on there. It'd make it have less drag if you were doing push cuts through stuff. Although, I can see why somebody doing certain kinds of tasks might want that beefy spine, full length, the full width of the spine all the way out to close to the tip. This is going to be really tough to snap the tip on this thing. So if you're abusing your knives and using them for things that knives really generally shouldn't be used for, and you're applying a little bit of, you're doing a little bit of sideways pressure, not exactly, don't use a knife as a pry tool, but if it's getting kind of into a gray area there between what's okay with a knife and what's not, uh, that is one of the more stout tips I've seen on a pocket knife this year, um, or on a current model pocket knife, I should say. Um, Except for, I mean, they're hugely overbuilt knives that are real thick at the tip, but excluding those, with sort of just a normal pocket knife, that's got quite a stout tip. Now, if you're looking for something that has the aesthetic of a traditional case knife, but that has some of these more modern features, like a flipper tab, I would actually recommend going with something other than case. Finch, for example, has this is the Chernobyl ant. Uh, has this knife with a flipper tab. It's a traditional shape blade, and it's got some of the sort of like lines and dimensions that you would see in something like a traditional sod buster, except that it got a flipper tab and liner lock and a pocket clip. So some of the conveniences that you know are missing on a traditional sod buster, but some similar aesthetics. All right, that's my quick look at the Kinzua and the Marilla from Case, um, and yeah, I am happy with my Marilla. That's the bottom line. All right, thanks.